Master your inner critic. Today I'm going to be drilling down into the inner critic, really tackling that voice that is constantly shaming you, criticizing you, judging you, belittling you, abusing you, attacking you, beating you up, and generally making you feel like you're worthless, like you're no good, like you're bad, like you're defective, like you can't do anything properly. However it attacks you, I think we can all relate to this voice in the head, which makes our lives very difficult. And as I felt in my life, as you probably felt, that this just makes you live in fear. You don't take risks. You just play life very safely, or maybe you're always anxious about the repercussions of things. And this voice is just always in there, constantly berating you, relentlessly attacking you. So in this video, I'm going to explore, where does this inner critic come from? What created it? What's the big mistake everyone makes when trying to handle the inner critic? How do we silence it and eventually make it work for us instead of against us? So what we have to understand is that this is a skill, and anyone that's successful knows that they talk to themselves in a specific way. They're not always beating themselves up. We'll go into that. They have a very specific way that they have a very good relationship with themselves. They have high self-esteem. They know how to talk to themselves in a way which motivates them, which isn't detrimental to their own self-worth. And people that are successful understand that the way you talk to yourself is very important. Normally, this is a hugely underrated and overlooked skill set. How you speak to yourself is probably one of the most important things you need to learn. It's one of the most crucial, if not the most crucial elements determining how successful you are in your health, finance, dating, relationships. And without realizing it, probably a lot of men are struggling mentally, and they don't realize it's the inner critic, it's the voice in the head which is constantly shaming them, berating them, making them feel worthless, making them feel small. And it's why they're turning to therapy or drugs, or one of the leading cause of death for men under 50, I think, is suicide. And that probably comes from them being extremely hard on themselves, an extreme end of this. So this skill set is just something that men are never taught. They don't understand how that they can develop a good relationship with themselves, how they can talk to themselves. And also because it's probably because they're so hard on themselves. It's something I experienced where I was just constantly in my own head telling myself how bad I was. So learning this skill has been life-changing for me. It's been one of the most important things I've ever done. And that's why making videos like this is something that I'm very passionate about. I'm positive that if you just focus on this one area of mental health, it will have the biggest impact on your life. Getting that internal dialogue sorted, how you talk to yourself, is one of the most important, if not the most important skill sets to learn, and it's something you can improve and get better at. Actually, while I was filming this, I have my other phone here. I dropped it and it smashed on the floor. Now it's not working, and it's an indicator of how far I've come with my internal dialogue, because maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I would have been in my head for the rest of the day, berating myself, telling myself that I'm no good, I'm worthless. See, you always break things. And then I'd be playing out, oh, you've got to spend money to get it fixed or get a new phone. And you can see how detrimental this internal dialogue can be to your life. Just one small thing like that, which is just an accident. I'm only human. Everybody makes mistakes. And then that would just ruin the rest of my day. Maybe potentially the rest of my week, because I'd just be thinking, oh, now I've got to get a new phone. Can I afford it? This is the issue. So before I get into the issue of the inner critic, I just want to talk quickly about the idea of self-love. Don't do self-love. Do this instead. The idea is confusing and difficult to define. It's nearly impossible to generate feelings of self-love if we overall hate ourselves. The limbic or emotional part of the brain which produces this hostility is also the same part which is producing the inner critic. A better way to look at this is self-respect. So it's important to understand that we're not just going to be generating this new voice in our head. We have to redirect the voice we have already. But I'm going to be getting into that in this video. A lot of the times when you learn about the inner critic, you're always redirected to this idea, this confusing notion of self-love. And what I want to say quickly is that redirect it to self-respect. So when I first realized I had a harsh inner critic, I was taught to write down all of the things that my inner critic was telling me, all the patterns and all the usual dialogues, the usual sayings I would say to myself if I messed up or if I did something that I was ashamed of. I would write these down, and there was a big realization from just writing this down. I realized how ridiculous I sounded, how abusive I was to myself, how disrespectful I was to myself. So instead of self-love, you've got to have respect for yourself. And the point is, I would never talk to somebody like this. The way I was talking to myself, I would never speak to a stranger. I wouldn't even speak to an enemy or like an ex-girlfriend that I was angry at. I would never speak to anyone like this. It was so abusive. But just writing down, the very act of writing down and taking a step back made me realize, oh my God, I am really hard on myself. And it wasn't until I actually became introspective and started paying attention to the voice in the head that I realized that this is ridiculous. This is so far-fetched. So let's get into the origins and what created the inner critic. Where does the inner critic come from? It's learned. Adopted from parents. It's the parentified part of you. Harsh parents who are sharp to discipline you for everything. So maybe you were abused, physically abused, sexually abused, or you were abandoned or neglected. And what happens is we take on that voice in the head. We internalize that to mean that we are no good. And then that becomes the dialogue. That becomes the voice that we tell ourselves. And then that bleeds into adulthood. That gets transferred into adulthood. When a child is ignored, abandoned, or neglected, or hurt, it doesn't realize that it's not its fault. It believes that the child believes that that is its fault. It becomes the dialogue. It believes that, well, it must be because you're not good enough that you are the reason for this situation. So you internalize this dialogue. A child will interpret this as, I'm not getting my needs met, so therefore the reason must be something wrong with me. I need to do something about this. Cue the self-berating talk. Like, you see, you should always do this. You should be better. You got to do better. You got to do something to get attention. You got to do something to get your caregivers' attention, your parents' attention. And that's normally in the form of an internal dialogue. It is a defense mechanism, essentially. So if you were ignored or not acknowledged or not validated or not got your needs met as a child, you blamed yourself. You internalized it to be, it's me. And that will then translate into the internal dialogue. I must be defective. This will then turn into a hostile view of yourself. This view gets cemented and carries on into adulthood. And it may be that in many areas of your life, you are competent, you do have success, you are motivated. But the issue is that it's still there. The self-attacking is still there. It could be that you are motivated to not let people down. You have a shame-based motivation. And this could be just to prove yourself, to get validation, to get the love from somebody else. This is known as shame-based motivation or dark motivation. This can actually get you very far, but is most likely offset with a low impulse control in other areas. An example being the workaholic or the perfectionist that never quite achieved his parents' acknowledgement or approval. So shame-based motivation or dark motivation is very unsustainable. It's normally offset with low impulse control and will eventually lead to self-sabotage. That harsh internal critic is still there. There's a lot of guys, a lot of my friends, I've seen it over the years, a lot of my friends who are successful, and when I've asked them about this, yeah, they're earning lots of money, they've reached the top of their company, maybe they're CEOs, but they still have this internal dialogue which is berating them, belittling them, making their lives misery. But on the outside, they seem successful, but the way that they speak to themselves is horrific. And then they have to offset that with drugs, alcohol, whatever it is that they're doing to not want to be alone with that inner critic. So it's completely unsustainable. And even though they are successful on the outside, they still have this real deep self-hatred and they just can't appreciate their successes. They can't appreciate, they always accredit to something else. They just don't have a very good appreciation for themselves. A healthy relationship with yourself is built on self-compassion. That being how much you acknowledge and validate your hard work and truly appreciate yourself. How do we silence or tame the inner critic? Now, the big mistake I mentioned earlier that most people make when they're dealing with their inner critic is they try to get rid of it. They try and silence it. They fight against it. And anyone that studied a little bit of psychology understands this rule is that what you resist persists. Basically, what you fight just gets stronger and stronger. You can deny it for a certain amount of time, but eventually it will come back in the form of self-sabotage. It's just too strong an emotion, it's too powerful, and it will overpower you. So if we're not trying to get rid of the inner critic and we can't silence it, what do we do? So here are some very powerful questions you can ask yourself on how to deal with the inner critic. What are the origins of your inner critic? Who does your inner critic remind you of? What does the inner critic say that sounds familiar? What circumstances or situations in your childhood may have helped you develop this part of you? Now, a key thing to understand is that this part of you, this inner critic, did serve a purpose. It did at some point. The key thing to understand is that this inner critic is not bad, it's not evil, it's not a bad part of you. It had a purpose. It wants the best for you. It did at some point want to protect you, and that's all it's doing, but it just doesn't realize the damage it's causing. It's not actually against you. It doesn't hate you, and no, it's not evil. It's not a bad part of you. This part of you feels like it's helping you, and it thinks it has to do this job to protect you. What we want to try to understand is, what is it trying to protect you from? What does it want you to know? What does it want to see happen? Now, it might be helpful to pause this video afterwards, go back and go over these questions and really get a bit introspective on these questions. These questions are extremely powerful because it starts to shift the paradigm. It starts to internalize the message that no, this part of you isn't there to hurt you or make your life worse, even though it is. It's serving a purpose. And what you want to do is start redirecting this part of you that's always served you. It's always been there to protect you. So you've got to start seeing this part of you as a part of you that is trying to help you. And from there, it will loosen the sting. It will take the charge out of this little voice in the head that's always been this little inner drill sergeant that's constantly berating you. And what we're doing here with these questions is you're starting to build a new relationship with this voice, with this part of you, and redirecting it to something else. Something that you can actively do as you ask yourself these questions. What does this part of you want to know? What does it want you to do? Is to redirect it, to let it know that it doesn't need to be so harsh anymore. You've got it. I can handle it. It's a very powerful affirmation. I can handle it. And also reassure this part of you, this voice, which is very powerful to do, that it doesn't need to do this job anymore. It doesn't live in the past anymore. You are an adult now. It's protecting you from a time which doesn't exist anymore. It's in the past. You are now able, you are functioning well, and you can handle it. That's the point. So it doesn't need to do that job anymore. You can thank it for its service and then say thank you. Like you can move on now. In IFS therapy, a modality of therapy, the idea of parts work, this is a part of you that protected you. In IFS, the inner critic is also geniusly named as the loyal soldier. So if you start to view it as this loyal soldier, you can say, look, service over. Thank you very much. You don't need to drill me anymore. I've got this. Now you can start to develop that relationship with it. But it's not going to stop. I appreciate that. But you can start to redirect it. It has an energy to it and it can start to serve you. So you just let it know, thank you for your service. Service is over. We're going to do a different job now. Redirect the inner critic. Set some boundaries with what you will tolerate from your inner critic. You've got to start putting your foot down. The analogy would be, imagine you are working in a restaurant or a pub or a bar and you've got that one drunk, rude customer. Maybe he's irregular, maybe he's very friendly most of the time, but every now and then he gets too drunk and he's aggressive and he's rude and he's arrogant. You've got to say no. If you do that again, you're out. And that's how you have to be with your inner critic. You've got to start training yourself to spot those negative voices when you start self-attacking and be like, put your foot down, no. And it's called an interrupt. Put the pattern interrupt in. No, we're not doing this now. And then redirect it to gratitude, appreciation, validation, and acknowledgement of yourself. So the final and most effective point I want to make about the inner critic, which actually is the point that changed everything for me. So do the questions, write down the answers. But what you want to do now is redirect, repurpose the inner critic to become a gratitude, validation, acknowledgement machine. Whenever you catch it berating you, redirect it to be positive and grateful and actually motivate you in a more appreciative way. You've got to constantly redirect it. Repurpose the inner critic. This has been the most effective and most helpful advice for me dealing with my inner critic, and it's been life-changing for me. Repurpose the loyal soldier. What function do you want it to serve? You want it to appreciate you. You want gratitude. You want to repurpose this energy and start getting it to notice that when you're doing well, It all takes practice. It takes trial and error. It needs a mission. It needs a purpose. It is a loyal soldier. Its purpose now isn't to make your life harder, but actually to improve your life. So now what you want is your inner critic to turn into your biggest inner cheerleader. It redirect your inner critic. When you start to catch yourself judging it, or it judging other people, or judging yourself, pattern interrupt. No, rejudge it to look how far we've come. Look how well we're doing. Let's just get through this. Turn it into a motivator, an appreciator, acknowledger, a validator, not somebody like an inner drill sergeant that's making you feel shitty. Really commit to repurposing this. Really commit to this. Actually make this a focus, and I promise you it will change your life. You'll notice that you do start building a new relationship with the inner critic. It will start to work for you. So give the loyal soldier a new mission. Turn it into acknowledgement, gratitude, and appreciation machine. So that's it, guys. I really hope that helps. Please like and subscribe to the video. Share. Send this to other people you know is hard on themselves. I hope that more guys can see videos like this. I hope that this gets lots of views, because I think this is one of the most life-changing things I've ever learned about. Once I did this is one of the most effective pieces of mental health advice I've ever experienced. So share it around, guys, and like and subscribe. Anyway, that's it. Peace.